Hey, it's me, your boy Blue Getsuga, and I'll be doing another Yu-Gi-Oh! Tier analysis video. And today I'll be doing Reptiliannes. At least I'll be starting off with Reptiliannes. Reptiliannes are a 5D's archetype, and as their name suggests, they're a reptile archetype. I'm not sure whether to call it a synchro archetype since they only have one synchro monster and one link monster. Because yeah, this deck is that criminally unsupported. Anyways, we for the pluses you have reptile support. I would put Master Rule 5, except this deck wasn't good in Master Rule. This deck wasn't good in Master Rule 4 or in Master Rule 5, especially considering that this deck didn't really have many extra deck plays to even go into in the first place. And they have decent tuners, and that's just me being generous with that because only its newest tuner is good, and even then it kind of sucks that you can only use one of its effects. And the other level 2 tuner, it's decent if your opponent controls a monster with 0 attack, which is this deck's gimmick essentially, and it's very hard to actually get to this deck's gimmick given how unsupported this deck is. So there's that. And for the cons, they lack ways to consistently lower your opponent's attack to 0. And that is its biggest and main issue. And I mean that is its biggest issue. There aren't many ways to actually do it in deck. I think, if I can recall, there's like 2 ways. One of which is the level 2 tuner, and the other is a level 1 monster that you have to crash into your opponent's monster. And that is bad. Con number 2. You are prone to taking a lot of damage because a lot of your monsters are incredibly frail, and some of your monsters actually require you to crash into your opponent's monsters to get them to 0 attack, which again kind of sucks. Oh yeah, there's 3 ways to actually get them to 0 attack, 2 of which requires your opponent to attack into you, and one of them is actually good, but oh yeah, like I mentioned, you take damage, and I forgot to mention the level 2 actually burns you for damage for some reason. So not only could you not use both effects per turn, but it also inflicts damage to you as if this deck wasn't already incredibly prone to dealing you damage. This deck is inconsistent. I should say very inconsistent, since you don't really have any search power outside of the one Reptilian Gardna, and it's a very slow form of searching since your opponent has to destroy it in order for you to get a search. And I don't think I need to explain why that's I don't need to explain why that's actually horrible. Oh yeah, and you also have your Link monster, which is a decent searcher. But it's again I guess it's very hard to go into it since this deck doesn't really have any ways of swarming outside of your level 2 tuner. It has trouble dealing with big monsters, especially with protection, meaning that if you do have ways to actually get their attack to 0, it's going to be very hard to do so. And it has a very high chance to lose after a single negate. Also, this deck needs more extra deck monsters. So I'd actually give this tier 4.5, potentially even drop it down to tier 5, but the Link monster saves it from being a tier 5 deck, and that's actually very sad. Next and lastly would be Battlin Boxers. Battlin Boxers are a Fire Warrior deck, and they're Xyz based. Anyways, Yeah, I forgot where I was going with this, but anyways, let's get right into the pros. For the pros, Master Rule 5, because now you can actually summon multiple of your Xyz monsters from your deck. I mean, from your extra deck, obviously. They have decent protection against battle and card destruction. They have cool boss monsters, and they also have generic warrior support to work with, including the new In for Noble Knight support. The problem with this deck is it lacks versatility because, unlike decks like Gokis or Rockets, or even your Elemental Hero decks or your Hero variants, this deck doesn't really have all that many versatility because their main deck monsters, they're kind of static and some of them have unnecessary restrictions on them. So there's that. So you're kind of forced to play a very standard build of Battlin boxers. And their extra deck monsters don't really provide much coverage. This deck is weak to non-battle and non-destruction removal because, I mean, to be fair, it's a Zexal deck, so I don't expect it to be all that great. About half their monsters do little to nothing, which, like I mentioned with the lack of versatility, you're going to have to run the same monsters, like your best monsters in your main deck, and even then, they aren't really that great. I mean, they're great, but they're not great alone. The deck desperately needs more monsters. Which brings me to the next point. They need better or more decent main deck and extra deck options, including more spells. Because this deck has a lot of trap cards for some reason, but they only have one spell card. And that's really sad, especially since their spell card is an iffy Monster Reborn. And this deck has a few weird restrictions, which kind of reminds me of Dino Wrestlers. And I hate that so much. But at least with this deck, they kind of have an excuse since, it's a Zexal deck. Anyways, I'll give this deck a tier 3.5. And you could potentially argue that it should be moved up to tier 3 since some of the Inferno for Noble Knight cards actually make this deck a little bit better. Not to mention the Numeron cards. The Numeron cards actually work wonders in this deck, especially with the Numeron field spell. But yeah, tell me what you guys think. Anyways, it's me, your boys, Blue Getsuga, and I'm out.